When I was little, around 7 years old, I lived with my mom and my sister. We had different dads but the same mom. My mother and father had separated a couple of years before and lived apart. My dad lived about 2 hours away, and I saw him every other weekend. Since the separation, my mom had gone on various dates with different men, but they all never really worked out. At this point, I would just like to mention that my mom drank a lot of alcohol. She had a very hard life, and alcohol had always been her way to cope with it. I've made peace with that since then, and she's a lot better off today. One morning, I remember waking up and going to my mom's room to see a strange man in bed with her. Nothing unusual, I guess, just another date I'd probably never see again. However, since that date, John never really left our lives, and he and my mom ended up dating for quite a bit. John was actually very nice at first. He would let me and my sister, who was 6 years older than me, stay at his house when my mom did, and he would give us lots of sweets as well. Eventually though, I can't really remember when, but John began to become very abusive. Honestly, I was so young it all feels like a blur now. I can only recall bits and pieces of information, but I remember him and my mom getting into arguments all the time. He would smash stuff around the house, and even sometimes strike at my mom too. Later on, I learned he did stuff like rip my mom's earrings out and hold a samurai sword to her throat even. Every time they would get into a fight, he would leave at stupid times like 3 a.m. My mom would leave a bit later to go after him, I presume. This would leave my sister, then 13, to look after me and get me ready for school. After school, I would walk out to see both John and Mom in the car waiting for me, and I would feel dread because I knew he would still be in our lives. You would think all of that would be the creepy part, but no. You see, John was also in an organization for men. I don't want to say the name of it here because of anonymity, but it was all very secretive stuff. He was never allowed to talk about what happened at their meetings to my mom or us. Women were not allowed to join either. The only time women could join events was the annual ladies' event that they often held, which my mom would go to as well. Around the same time, my nan got into a relationship with a man named Kenny. Kenny also was a part of this organization, it turned out, and he and John were very friendly with each other. My mom now strongly believes that they both knew each other before they'd ever met my nan or my mom. Kenny was also very abusive towards my nan as well, to the point that he even knocked some of her teeth out once. Kenny and John's friendship suddenly came to an end one night when my mom and John were visiting my nan and Kenny, while me and my sister were visiting our dads. My mom remembered she was offering to make Kenny a roast dinner for tomorrow. She went to the toilet, and when she came back, she overheard the conversation between Kenny and John become very heated. Before she could even find out what was going on, she felt 2 punches to the neck. John pushed her and yelled at her to run, and when she turned, she saw Kenny stabbing John 8 times. Somehow, they escaped out the front door with my nan, and it was only then that my mom realized she had been stabbed in the back of the neck twice. Eventually, the police turned up and Kenny was arrested, while my mom and John were taken to the hospital. Luckily, they both survived. We never did find out the reason why Kenny became so suddenly hostile and stabbed everyone, but I wouldn't be surprised if it had something to do with this organization they shared. We never saw Kenny again after the court case ended, but we believe he got put into a psychiatric hospital. Apparently, he pleaded that a mental illness had pushed him to stab them. After Kenny was gone, my nan, who had schizophrenia, came to stay with us for a while, until she felt safe and mentally sound to go home. I think Kenny really did a number on her, because she was never quite right after that. Now for the creepiness part 2. Despite Creeper Kenny now being gone, John was still around, which didn't make my life any easier. He made life hell for us after instead, constantly getting angry, hitting my mom, getting angry at me and my sister. Once I accidentally dropped and broke a pot of mustard on the floor. I remember my mom and I just freezing, because we were so terrified at how John would react. My sister, being a bit older at the time, remembered a lot more of the creepy things she caught him doing as well, such as sitting on my bed wistfully one night when I was away at my dad's. When she asked him what he was doing, he'd say, "Where else would I be?" She once walked in on my mom crying. When she asked what was wrong, John just told her, a 16-year-old, "Your mom was raped." Me and my mom would have to go on walks at midnight around the neighborhood if we made him angry, and my sister can't quite remember why. But once she was so terrified and upset at John, she ran out of the house barefoot and ran all the way to her dad's, which was a 10-minute walk away. When she arrived at his house, John was already waiting there. That fucked my sister up, because she left the house before John did and sprinted to her dad's. The only way he would have made it there before her was if he ran too. My mom became very strange and weird during her time with John, doing things she had never done before, as if she was having a mental breakdown. At the time, we believed it was just because John was abusive and because of the alcohol. In recent years, though, she's admitted to us that she believes John was drugging her at the time. She even ended up marrying him overnight with only 2 witnesses, both from the secret organization. You can clearly see her looking very drugged out in the wedding photos, and we only found out they were married a week later. She never felt right in her time with him, and told us that whenever she went to the ladies' nights, she would not remember anything about the night in the slightest. I remember one night John made the creepiest comment towards my sister when she was around 13. They were talking about that mysterious ladies' night. He said, "Now that you're old enough to participate, we'll buy you a pretty dress and you can come with us and see." My sister told us that when he said that, she felt so uncomfortable she hated the idea of it immediately and completely refused outright. He made the same comment to me too when I turned 10, saying that when I was a bit older I could finally go. I remember being so excited about buying a dress and being able to go to this secret club my mom often went to. After learning though about how nobody ever remembered this ladies' night, I'm so glad I never got the chance to go. I was 11 once when I woke up to the sounds of my mom screaming. John had just passed away. He was diabetic but was terrible at managing his insulin levels. He died from too much fluid collecting in his lungs. That was both the worst and best day of my life. I would never wish anyone dead, but when John passed away finally, I felt a huge weight lift off my chest. What an awful thing for an 11-year-old to feel. I shiver whenever I think about what our lives might still be like if he was alive. I wonder if we would have even survived. I was always the weird kid growing up, so making friends was never very easy for me. I was a bit of a punk in high school, so living in a preppy religious town was my idea of hell. Eventually, I met this boy named Sean. I was so happy to finally have someone I connected with. We very quickly became best friends and hung out nearly every day. He was very odd, but so was I, so I was able to look past it. Notably, most of the time when we would hang out, we were also on drugs, so I figured some of the weird stuff he said must have just been the drugs talking. One day, though, he just randomly said, "Hey, I'm gonna stab someone this week." 4 days later, he threatened to shoot up our school on Instagram. He played it off as a joke when I confronted him about it, but when the school confronted him, they took it much more seriously. He was taken into custody by the police, but not charged with anything somehow. His parents also took away his phone and forced him to move away for a few weeks to let the air clear out, but we kept in contact in the meantime. Around this point, my dumb self realized I was in love with him. I did everything I could to clear his name. I even got into arguments with parents on Facebook. My parents begged me to stop talking to him, but for some reason, I truly believed he was good. I didn't want to believe he was really capable of hurting anyone. The whole shooting thing never really blew over, though. When he came back to school, students would run away from him in the hallways. People would send him threats at all times. His reputation was completely ruined. After this, something in him changed. He was a lot angrier. We would be talking and joking around about some random thing when all of a sudden he would just start attacking me with words. I'd tell him about a boy I was talking to and he'd call me a whore. Or if I made any new friends, he'd go out of his way to ruin my new friendships. For some reason, he did this in a way that I saw it as him being supportive. About a year went by after this. The verbal abuse continued, and I continued to do nothing about it. I was still in love with him after all, but I didn't act on it since he was my closest friend. And to keep my mind off Sean for a while, I started dating this guy named Alex. Sean hated him, not for any particular reason or anything. He just didn't like that I spent time with someone that was not him. Alex was also a weed dealer, and Sean knew this. Sean asked if Alex would front him some weed since he knew we were best friends, and Alex did so. I don't remember the exact amount, but it was a decent chunk. Enough to be mad about if you didn't get paid back for it. Well, of course, Sean never paid him back. Alex tried to talk to him about it, but Sean always put him off and avoided him. After about a month of this, Alex saw Sean's car in a Taco Bell parking lot and pulled up. He saw Sean in his car and began to get out. Since Alex had anger issues, he also pulled his baseball bat along with him. Sean saw him and freaked out. He pulled out of his parking spot quickly, drove off and called 911. Alex was then arrested for assault with a deadly weapon. 3 days later, when Alex got out of jail, he was driving to his friend's house when he saw Sean standing in his front yard. He rolled down his window and called him a pussy, then drove away. Sean called the police again, and Alex was arrested for stalking this time. Around this time, my parents had caught me smoking. I didn't want to lie anymore, so I was honest about everything. Obviously, they were mad at me for getting myself into the situation. I had just told them that I was smoking weed and dating a drug dealer, so I was in a pretty fair amount of trouble. My parents took my phone away as soon as I got home from school. I wasn't allowed to see Alex when he got out of jail, and they took my paychecks as well, so I wouldn't use all my money to buy weed. They also made me download a tracker on my phone so they could make sure I was home when they weren't. They contemplated calling Sean's parents too and telling them we had been smoking together. I knew that if Sean got caught smoking again, he would get kicked out of his house, so I snuck my phone and texted him my parents might call his. He was extremely pissed. He called me all kinds of horrible names and said he wished he had never even met me. I'd finally had enough at that point. I told him not to talk to me ever again. My parents never did end up calling his parents, though. After that, we pretty much didn't talk at all anymore. I asked not to be scheduled with him at work and avoided him at all costs at school. We didn't have any classes together either, so it wasn't too hard. But hearing the stuff he'd started to say about me made me find it a little bit difficult. He had started rumors I was addicted to coke, stuff about me selling nudes. This is when the texts started. He began texting me constantly, so I blocked his number. Then he'd use someone else's phone to text me instead, so I'd block that number as well. Then he'd use WhatsApp or GroupMe since we used those for work, so I blocked him on there too. He eventually got fired from our job because he had been writing tips on receipts if people didn't ask for a copy of their receipt and left the tip line empty. The messages got even more furious for the next few weeks. I just continued to block anyone he was associated with. I didn't want to be in contact with him whatsoever. He kept making these new Instagram accounts to message me on though, but all of his attempts to contact me failed. One day, I had a late lesson at School of Rock where I took guitar lessons. My teacher had stayed late for me, so I was expecting his car to be the only one still in the lot, but it wasn't. There were 2 cars sitting there, my teacher's and Sean's. To this day, I don't even know how he knew I was going to be there. I quickly parked, locked my doors, and thought about what to do. I then realized he was not in his car. I calmed down a bit and called inside to ask if he was there, but he wasn't. I cautiously got out of my car and grabbed my guitar, then walked inside with no problems. After my lesson, though, I came outside to see that he was now parked right next to me, waiting for me to get into my car. When he saw me, he began screaming profanities at me. He just stood there screaming at me. I quickly climbed into my car from the passenger door, so I didn't have to walk next to him. Then I drove home as fast as I could. After that, he began asking people to ask me to talk to him at school. Of course, I didn't. Each time someone mentioned his name to me, it caused me to have a panic attack so bad I'd have to leave school. I ended up missing the entire month of November, then switching to an online school. About a month after I did this, I was driving with a friend to pick up food for my mom. As soon as we pulled into the drive-thru, the car behind me began to flash their brights at me. I looked in my rearview mirror, only to see Sean's car right there. He had this identifying sticker across the top of his windshield, so I knew it was him right away. I looked over at my friend in fear. I didn't want to scare you, so I didn't say anything, but he's been following us since we left Target. I panicked and just pretended not to notice him. He then pulled out of the drive-thru and parked right next to it by the exit. As soon as I pulled out, so did he. I sped to my friend's house, dropped her off, and went straight home. At this point, my parents thought going to the police with everything would be the smartest thing to do. An officer came over to my house and took a statement. I showed him screenshots of every message he'd sent over the past months, and my friend that was in the car with me in the drive-thru talked to the police officer as well. We decided not to press charges, but we did decide to file an incident report. Days went by and I didn't hear anything else from him. I thought maybe it was over and I could finally move on with my life. But my dad told me Sean had messaged him on Facebook. He was saying all sorts of things like I was addicted to pills and that I had even stolen money from my dad to buy more. I've never done pills in my life. I'm a hippie, so I stick to natural drugs. My parents know this, so they screenshotted the messages and sent them to the police as well. The police stopped by his house to tell him to stop contacting me. I continued to get messages from random Instagram accounts, and sometimes I'd see his car behind me random places. Each time I'd write down the location, date, and time I saw him. At this point, I started to work with Alex's lawyers to prove Sean wasn't this innocent victim he was pretending to be. Eventually, Alex's charges were dropped as well. Sean had been proven unreliable when I came forward with my story. I wish I could say I had an ending to all this, but I don't. I still get random messages from him, but I don't bother to screenshot them anymore. Since I switched to online school, I was able to graduate a year early. Because of that, I moved away for college, so I don't worry about him following me everywhere anymore. Last I heard about him was that he got arrested just a few months ago. I've never posted anything here before. This kind of feels tame, I guess, compared to some of the other things on here, but it still haunts me to this day. This actually happened when I was a teenager, around 14 or 15 years old and in high school. I had a boyfriend at the time who lived a fairly short walk away from the school. We would often go to his place after school ended and hang out for a few hours before I'd walk home. Because we took the same route so often, I knew all of the houses and landmarks along the way. In January, I live in the north, so the winter is pretty cold and snowy. My boyfriend and I started to notice a car had been parked in the same spot for a suspiciously long time. We thought nothing of it at first. Maybe the car had just died in the cold, and whoever owned it couldn't afford to have it towed and repaired. But as spring came and went, and the snow finally melted, the car was still there, parked in the same spot at the end of my boyfriend's street. We passed it almost every day as we walked there after school, and as the days grew warmer, a rotten stench started to rise from the car. I began to joke with my boyfriend. "You know, I bet there's a body in that trunk." We laughed it off together, but we were curious now. One day, we peered inside the car windows as we passed. The car was extremely messy, but not filled with trash or food. A discarded backpack lay across the seat, and papers were strewn about here and there. It looked like any other ordinary car, except we knew it hadn't moved for months now. The smell was indescribable. This smell continued to get worse and worse as the spring turned into summer. One day, when I couldn't come over for some reason, my boyfriend and his dad decided to finally investigate this car. When they did so, they found that the doors were unlocked and the keys were still left inside. That was pretty strange. They went around to the back and popped open the trunk. My boyfriend told me that a swarm of black flies immediately flew up from inside. That smell was definitely coming from the truck. Inside were a collection of black garbage bags. My boyfriend and his dad decided to call the cops at this point. The cops later told us that inside of those bags was rotting meat, cut into pieces. The first pieces they tested belonged to a pig, but a few weeks later, my boyfriend's dad got another call. Under that pig meat were the bones of a human child. Whoever left that car sitting unlocked with the keys inside was obviously hoping it would be stolen. It still gives me the shivers. This story is from a few years ago, probably 2009 or 2010 just about. I was in college at the time, and I used to drive a little manual two-door. It had a back seat, but if you were over 5'6", it was basically impossible to sit in comfortably. I was walking out of a big box store one night when I saw this disheveled woman in complete hysterics outside. She was claiming her boyfriend had taken her paycheck to go get high, and now she couldn't get home. Excuse me, where's home? I asked. She answered it was in a town that was probably about 20 minutes away, but for me, it wasn't that far out of the way to help a crying random lady. During the car ride there, she began to act more and more fidgety. She told me about her history of drug abuse and her abusive druggy boyfriend. How she probably wouldn't even be able to pay rent. All sorts of things like that. Meanwhile, we're driving out to more and more secluded parts of town, and the drive is taking longer and longer. About halfway through this drive, she mentioned she also has a host of mental illnesses. Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. Now I'm beginning to wonder about the truth of her story. Whatever, I guess that explains the fidgeting if she just got done with a panic attack, adrenaline and whatnot. Finally, after 40 minutes of driving, we reached this house with no lights on and no cars there. She told me she lived with her kids and her mom. She starts to fumble around to hand me money for gas. I told her not to worry about it because my mileage was fine, and she said she needed to pay her rent. She hesitated then. I'm not sure if she hesitated because I was not accepting the money or if she was thinking of doing something else, but here I was alone in the middle of nowhere, near this completely empty house. I turned my GPS on with directions to home to indicate I was now going to leave. Pretty quickly, she got out of the car, but she went in a completely different direction, away from that empty house, and wandered off into the woods. I never saw her again. I'm not sure if she was just scared, or if she was trying to lure me out in the middle of nowhere for whatever reason. A part of me really hoped she really was just coming down from a panic attack after getting left in a parking lot by her abusive druggy boyfriend, and she was just jittery because of that. But while it was happening, I definitely started getting a feeling that something was not right. I thought about it a lot before. I've considered that maybe my manual transmission, my GPS having a phone, which was less common in a college town in 2010, or maybe something else changed her mind about doing anything weird to me, if she was considering it. But I guess it's a relatively happy ending that nothing happened. For the last year, I've been having to go to the laundromat at least once a week due to not being able to afford a new washer and dryer up front. It's never really been an issue until a few weeks ago. I went in one night just as usual, and there was an older gentleman already sitting there. I had never seen him before, but there aren't really sane people when I go usually. At one point, I heard him begin mumbling to himself, but there were plenty of people around then, so I wasn't really worried. I walked out the door to my car. He was sitting at a table with his head down. When I got around to the driver's side of my door, I looked up, only to see him standing at the laundromat door, staring right at me. I froze because I was so startled. I even sent my husband a text with a full description of him, just in case. Nothing happened for a while, though. Last week, I was there with my oldest son. The same man was there wearing the same outfit, so I started to wonder a little bit. We were the only three, and my laundry was the only ones being done at the moment. It clicked that maybe he was homeless, and he came in at night to stay warm or something, I left a couple of dollars by the vending machine, and when I was leaving, I heard him getting change and getting a snack. A couple of nights later, I had to go again to wash blankets, and he was there again. After the first occasion, though, on these two, I didn't get any further weird vibes from him like that first night, so I wrote it off as a coincidence and decided he was pretty harmless. Tonight, I had to go with my 3 kids while my husband was helping a friend at his house. When we got there, no one was there but us. We were sitting at the front of the place. My laundry was in the washers at the back, so I went back there to check the washers. I saw it was almost done. I continued around the corner to grab a basket, only to see the homeless man standing right there. I jumped a bit because I hadn't heard anyone come in, and he was definitely not there when we had walked inside. I continued past him and walked up to the other side to where my children were sitting. At this point, I could hear what the man was saying to himself. "She saw me and got scared and ran off. God, you're so stupid." I heard the bathroom door slam shut. Alarm bells were going off now. I quietly hurried my kids to get their stuff gathered up. I considered slipping out the front door that we were sitting by and walking down the alley and around to my car. It was dark and my kids were already getting scared though, so I decided that was not a good idea. Instead, we all held hands and walked straight to the back. I thought he must still be in the bathroom because I hadn't heard him ever come out once again. Once we passed the sitting area in the back though, he was standing right there combing his hair. We continued out the door like we weren't peeing our pants scared. I got all the kids in the car and went around to get in myself. There he was again, standing at the back door, staring at all of us. I quickly got in and locked all the doors and left. I called my husband so I could pick him up as well. We all came back to switch the clothes and wait for them to dry. The man was still there. We put the clothes in the dryer, then went to sit in the car. The man walked out, staring at me the entire time. He did a full 2 circles around the place, still watching me. My husband went back in once the clothes were dry and said the man was no longer in there. I'm officially creeped out by this now. I plan on only going during the day from now on, and I don't plan on staying if I'm the only one there. Hopefully, by the beginning of the year I can stop going altogether. Am I being crazy, or is this really creepy? This is going to be kind of long. I worked at a local coffee shop as a barista a few months back for about 7 months. I was 19 at the time. Currently, I'm 20 now. My coworkers knew about Gregory, but never paid him much mind. He had a big scar or birthmark on the entire left half of his face. Sometimes he carried around a radio that only played static. He would intently listen to it. He was known to hold up these crazy "the world is ending and you're going to hell" signs as well. He was homeless. He would buy these espresso shots with so much honey and just lick the honey directly out of the cup, which was always so gross and unsightly. But he had never been mean and really didn't bother anyone too much. He just really came off as kind of weird with how he spoke and what he said. He was all kind of all over the place. He would jump from one sentence to the next, but somehow it would still be tangible. One night I was working alone, and later closing with my coworker, who was a very small, petite girl, always smiling and not intimidating at all. It was probably around 7 p.m. She came in at around 8 or 8:30. As a side note, I'm a trans guy and have short hair and all, but I'm not on hormones yet, so I still kind of look a bit feminine. I had 2 regulars sat at the bar with me, and it wasn't very full in the lobby at all. In comes Gregory, but this time he seems a bit off, more so than usual anyway. He came up to the register and immediately said something like, "Hey, how you doing? I'm here to buy some coffee if I can. If the Lord will let me have one tonight, cause my card may be empty, but if he says so." Immediately I was like, okay. I asked him if he wanted the same thing as usual. He just repeated the same sentence to me. Like his sentences were very quick and erratic and on a loop. So I ran his card and it's empty. Oh, well, looks like the Lord wants me to go to bed and not have a drink. You know, if the Lord says so, it's the truth, right? Yeah, sorry, Gregory. By the way, you left your hat in here last time. He cut me off quite aggressively. Oh, I don't need possessions. They don't mean a thing compared to the Lord's love, you know. As long as I got my heart and soul, and as long as you love God and believe in Him, He'll do great things for you, you know. So what's your name again? How old are you? You seem young. At this point, when he asked my age, I was weirded out a bit more, but here's where it gets more uncomfortable. He then asked me if I'm married. I initially didn't understand him, so he asked again. I said no, I was not. As soon as I said no, he cut me off and started talking even more erratically and quickly, stuttering over himself. I could barely even listen and hear what he was saying. He told me his full name, his age, which was almost mid-50s, and where and when he was born. He went on to say he had no money but to go to Outback Steakhouse to find this person. He gave me their full name and said he didn't have money right now because he gets his check at the end of the month, but that wouldn't be a problem for us. Obviously, I was super creeped out. Reminder, 2 regulars at the bar were having a watch and hearing this whole conversation go down as well. I finally decided I needed to ask him to leave. Gregory, please stop. I'm not married, but I do have a boyfriend, and I'm gonna have... I couldn't even finish my sentence. He interrupted me again, raising his voice. Is he gonna commit to you? Is he? If not, you let me know, and I'll take good care of you. He rattled on about how he could never find a woman to be with, also assuming I was a woman myself. I attempted to tell him he needed to leave when he got physically angry. His expression snapped from upset to confused and pissed. He didn't say a word, but in the middle of me talking, he whipped around and walked out the door, slamming it hard against the glass and walking down the sidewalk to leave. Luckily, no one in the lobby really heard much, but the guys at the counter were as shocked as I was. It was my first time experiencing any kind of harassment at work, but that wasn't even the worst part. Another regular, a woman a couple of years older than me, used to work at a lingerie shop and currently works at a diner. I don't really know how we got into it, but she also explained to me an experience she had with Gregory. He had apparently walked into the store and asked angrily why they carried sodomy in this store. He then proceeded to rub the lotions they had all over his face. I learned that he was constantly in and out of jail for trespassing into places he's banned from, including the coffee shop I worked at, which no one even knew he was banned from because he'd been so long. He had some mental issues and handled that by doing copious amounts of drugs. I don't really know what kind of drugs, but Arkansas is the state of meth, and I assume with that kind of behavior, it's what he was working with. The second and possibly worse incident is when the woman I was talking to had a coworker of hers who met Gregory at the diner. She was opening at 4:30 a.m. with her boyfriend, when Gregory, who was already banned, knocked on the locked door and asked for food. The boyfriend said he needed to leave and go away. Gregory got angry and replied to the girl, "How dare you do this to me? Treat me this way. Whatever happens to you next is all your fault." He was later overheard saying that if he got the chance to be alone with her, he would rape her. He's been known to threaten other women with that as well. I was already afraid he would come back later while me and my small and sweet coworker were working together to get some kind of revenge, but I never expected him to be capable of that. I had to watch my back for the next few months. I saw him once more before I stopped working at that job, and he sent chills down my spine. He just glanced at me with zero expression. I tried to tell my male coworker, who he treated normally with a creepy smile, not to serve him. I hid in the back and waited until he left. I haven't seen him since, thankfully. I carry a knife now wherever I go. I've never shared this story with anyone. I was always too afraid to be judged for it, so it's something I buried deep down until my friend brought it up just the other day. We both have daughters now, and we're talking about how we could best educate them on being safe when they're teenagers and experimenting with partying. When my best friend and I were 17 years old, we went to the beach for spring break with a couple of our guy friends. My friend was talking to this guy she had met through mutual friends. He wanted us to meet up with him at a house he and his friends had rented together. Our guy friends had long since ditched us to meet girls, so we decided to go ahead and go to her friend's house to hang out with them. When we got there, it was in the middle of the day. He took us inside and introduced us to everyone. Turns out almost all the guys were on a basketball team of the same university. We hung out and they were all drinking. My friend and I were not, though. One guy came out with 2 glasses of what appeared to be whiskey and coke. Against my better judgment, I started to sip it, as did my friend. There was one guy who appeared to be not athletic, though, and he was the only person at the house who was seemingly not friendly toward us. I'll call him Mike. Suddenly, I started to feel very buzzed. We were laughing and talking, and one guy asked me to put on his jersey. I grabbed it and put it on over my clothes. "No, take your clothes off and put it on," he said in a very aggressive tone. I was feeling more and more tipsy at this point, and I began to realize something was very wrong. Our parents had let us drink with them multiple times, so I already knew what it was like to be drunk. I knew exactly how much I could handle before getting that way too, and one drink had never made me feel like I was getting wasted. "Come on, quit babysitting that drink. Drink up, you weakling," one guy said, and they all laughed. Even though I had already stopped drinking, I could still feel myself getting more and more buzzed, especially since our drink had barely tasted of any whiskey. My dad always had whiskey at home, and we would drink a couple whiskey Pepsis on occasion. I would feel relaxed then, but this was much different. "We should go now. Our friends are waiting for us." I headed for the door. A couple of guys moved to stand in front of us. No, you can't leave. Come sit down over here for a little bit." They ushered us back to the couch. That sinking feeling hit my gut, and I knew we were now on borrowed time. I tried to stay calm and laughed, thinking of what to do. "I need to pee. Come with me." I grabbed my friend's hand and we went to the restroom together. We both stood there, and we had already read each other's minds. I put my hands on her head and looked in her eyes so we could both try our best to focus. We need to leave right now. Our phones both had spotty service all over the island, I'm guessing because there were so many people packed in such a tight space. "Take my keys and tell them you're going to get your purse. I'll stay here. You go get the guys and come back for me." I knew this plan probably wouldn't work, but my mind was going crazy. As I opened the bathroom door, though, Mike was already standing there. My heart immediately sank. He had been rude to us earlier, and he'd probably just overheard our plan. He leaned in and whispered, "Follow me, and be quiet." Something inside me trusted him with everything I had in that moment. We followed him down a hallway into a garage and out through the front driveway. "Hurry up! Get out of here now!" We ran to the car and I drove off to our hotel. I remember driving sort of, but I don't even remember arriving to our condo. The rest of the story is from our guy friends, telling us what happened. Apparently, we walked in. The guys asked us where we had been, because it was already well into nighttime, and we were supposed to meet up for barbecue for some weenies. They said we didn't even say a word, just walked to our rooms, closed the door, and passed out. We didn't come out till the next day, and both of us had severe headaches, as if we'd drunk a whole bottle of cheap vodka all by ourselves. To the basketball douchebags who try to take advantage of 2 teenage girls, let's never meet again, or I will kick you in the dick. And thank you, Mike. I wish I could thank you. I hope you're out there reading this, and you remember the brunette and blonde little girls you saved that day on the island. This takes place over the course of a few years, from just before my university freshman year to just after my junior year. I'm now a 20-year-old female, but at the start of this story I was 17 years old. For my freshman orientation, my family and I were staying at a hotel right across from my college campus. Orientation started in the morning, so I wandered over to campus with my luggage to check into my dorm room for the next few days. I was roomed alone, at least for orientation, since I have OCD and sleeping problems, and I didn't want to bother any potential roommates just moving in. I put my luggage away and began to walk around the campus. This entire fiasco started for one simple reason. That morning I wanted breakfast. It was extremely foggy, and I had never been on this campus before. It was a ways away from my hometown after all, so I very quickly became completely turned around. I spotted a group of 4 people walking toward a building, so I swallowed up my anxiety and approached them to ask for directions. I should add that I'm a shy and quiet person, so it took a bit before I piped up and, "Excuse me." One of the 4 turned around. My immediate thought was, oh my god, this guy looks just like a fish. He had these big, creepy eyes and these big, fat lips. He was blonde and a little bit chubby. This is purely for descriptive purposes, by the way. I'm not exactly a model myself. Still, I stifled my gawking and asked him politely, "Excuse me, do you know where the dining hall is?" "Oh, yeah, it's right there." He motioned to the building directly behind us. Oh wow, I'm so dumb. There was a small pause before he asked, "Are you here alone?" As someone who's run into predatory people before, this question never ever sits well with me. My family will be here later. We all have sleeping problems, so they're catching up on sleep right now, and they'll be here at 6 actually. This wasn't a lie, but I hoped it would deter him from latching on to me. "Oh, well, do you want to sit with us in the meantime?" I guessed that he meant the group of 4 he was in, but the other 3 had already disappeared into the dining hall. "Sure," I conceded. He immediately grabbed a 2-person table, which made me internally groan. I had a feeling where this was going, and I already wanted no part of it. I mean, I'm a lesbian for Christ's sake. I didn't want to risk making him angry. I didn't want someone to hate me before the school year had even started, so I sat down with him and a plate of eggs. I tried to make conversation to at least be polite, but he just kept on replying very dryly with things like, "Oh, I thought I had upset this fish face somehow, so I looked up from my plate, only to see him staring directly at my breasts. I'm a 36 double D, so I'm unfortunately used to this. I sighed and bagged out my sweater around my chest. Even after this, and me slouching though, he just kept staring so blatantly. After this, I obviously didn't want anything to do with him. Unfortunately, I was not so lucky. Everywhere I went after that, he followed, even if our orientation events were completely separate. I repeatedly tried to give him the slip, becoming increasingly creeped out by his attempts at flirting, but everywhere I went, there was a fish face appearing. I gave it one last try, slipping away to the library. That's when the messages started. Somehow, this fish face had found my Snapchat. I guess he searched my name somehow. He kept messaging me things like, "Where are you? Where did you go? I'm right here." Knowing that he could see I'd read them, I felt obligated to respond. Okay, I'll be there soon, I guess. This didn't stop with orientation, though. The beginning of my freshman year was marred with fish face encounters. Classes, trips to the store, student activities off campus, it really didn't matter. He would be there every time, shadowing me. The constant messaging as well drove me to just delete my Snapchat. Thank goodness he never actually managed to get my phone number. At this point, Fishface was incessantly hitting on me, reminding me how much he liked me, despite numerous times of me stating I'm not interested. When I made myself clear, it only seemed to make him push even harder, as if he thought I was trying to play games with him or something. It became more and more common for him to try and touch me or put his arm around me. This is where I drew the line. I told him very clear as day, "I'm not interested in you, I don't like men, don't touch me." He pouted but relented. In touching me, at least. The shadowing got even worse, to the point I couldn't even leave without my now roommate. I couldn't actually get a single dorm for the rest of the actual school year. I became more exhausted, paranoid, and began to feel like he was a time bomb waiting to blow. After weeks of this, weeks of sheer anxiety, I spoke to a priest at my university. The father was deeply concerned, and even went so far as to walk me back to my dorm. He made me promise I would speak to security first thing the next day, which I agreed to. Of course, their first question was whether I was really being stalked or if my anxiety made me believe I was being stalked. When I cited all the witnesses to his shadowing me, that was dropped very quickly though. The next question was I clear enough with him? I don't really know how much clearer I could have been, really. After much back and forth like this, I finally managed to get a no-contact order with Fishface. I knew that a no-contact order only really meant he couldn't contact me and vice versa, rather than actually physically keeping him away from me. I was okay with this for now. I didn't want to seriously jeopardize the guy's entire future or anything. I just wanted him to leave me alone. For the remainder of the year, there were no more attempts to contact me or be near me. I thought that would be the end of it. But then came sophomore year. I could never be exactly sure if it was all a coincidence or if he was really tailing me, but he would start appearing outside of every classroom door, every coffee place, every store, absolutely everywhere. I was in a rough place this year too, totally unrelated to these events, but it certainly didn't help me feel any better. Due to the sheer emotional exhaustion I was battling, I really couldn't give a damn. Okay, follow me, whatever you want. I promise I'm really not that interesting. But this is when I learned of other victims. Their stories were identical to mine, 6 of them, mine being the 7th. They'd run into Fishface, a totally innocent encounter, and he just started in on them, bombarding them with messages, following them everywhere, groping them and trying to get them alone. I was horrified to find that every one of these other girls had already reported him to university security. Every one of them had also been prescribed a no-contact order. 7 victims later, and this bastard was still on campus, as if he'd never done anything wrong. I learned that this was not uncommon for our university, on top of all the victim blaming. The more I learned, the more deeply my fear ran. It was open season here, and these bastards had full protection. We couldn't do a single thing to get guys like Fishface off our campus, so I resigned myself to being followed by this fucker everywhere. Junior year came around, and it seemed that finally Fishface had given up. I could not be more wrong, though. It was pointed out to me by friends who knew about the stalking that he was in the background of my every move. Throughout the year, he would get closer and closer, until it eventually became worse than I'd ever dealt with before. I was a member of Campus Conservationists, and we were selling reusable grocery bags in lieu of our state banning plastic. After about 45 minutes of peace, I glanced to my right, only to see him there, hiding just around the corner out of sight, staring directly at me. Ice-cold fear ran down my spine, and my stomach dropped. I tore my gaze away and tried to hide my panic. He had never been this close to me since freshman year. There was no mistaking it. He was here for me, and me alone. I texted my girlfriend and let her know what was happening. I'll be honest when I say the rest is kind of a blur. I was too panicked to even remember how we got back to my dorm safely. I thank God every day for my ultra-protective girlfriend. Just 2 days after that, he appeared in the hallway outside of my class. It was just reaching the end, and I was ready to call it a day. I glanced at my watch. 2:45 p.m. I wandered into the bathroom, ignoring Fishface lurking around the corner. I did my business and approached the door. It began to open, so I called out, "Oh, I got it." I opened it for the next person to come in. Fishface. I felt my face go pale and my breath hitch. He stared directly at me with those creepy-ass blue eyes, his giant floppy lips pulled into a small smirk, before he turned and disappeared down the hall. My heart thumped in my chest as I re-entered the classroom. I felt myself shaking and tried to hide it. All that kept running through my head was, what was he doing? Why was he trying to get into the women's bathroom? I glanced down at my watch again and knew I didn't have time to wait for my girlfriend, as the class was minutes from ending. I asked the girl next to me to walk with me to my next class instead. She agreed without hesitation. She was actually a very nice girl, and I thank God for that. I finished my final class for the day and sped back to my dorm. Needless to say, I did not get much sleep that night. I reported everything to security the following morning. I was met with the same pressing questions and doubts. I threw everything I had at them, and asked them to watch the security cameras outside my classroom to see him attempt to corner me in the bathroom. I had to even threaten them to contact state police before they finally relented and promised to investigate my claims. They informed me, though, that no action would be taken. They said they could find no evidence of the incidences. When questioned, Fishface said that him appearing around my classrooms and frequented spots around campus were purely coincidental, and he felt so awkward he was going through this again. I took my second semester of junior year off for unrelated reasons, yet I'm relieved to not be on campus with that creep. He's still there. The other victims have mostly transferred to other universities, due to the college's general mistreatment and poor administration. I start my senior year this August at the same university. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if he's going to step up his game. I listen to enough true crime to know what could happen, and it scares me like few things ever have.